You know, there's something rather unsettling that happens after awakening that nobody talks about. People come to me months or years into their spiritual journey and they say, I thought awakening would give me something, but I feel like I've lost more than I've gained. Is that normal? Did I do something wrong? And I have to tell them, no, they didn't do anything wrong. Awakening isn't about gaining something. It's about losing things. Losing illusions, losing comforts, losing the ability to see the world the way they used to see it. And here's the difficult part. Once these things are lost, they can never get them back. Not ever, even if they wanted to. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He worked with hundreds of people going through individuation, through awakening, through the process of becoming conscious. And he watched them lose things. Important things, comforting things, things they didn't even know they'd valued until they were gone. And he noticed something crucial. The people who tried to get these things back, who tried to return to their old way of being, they couldn't. The door had closed behind them. There was only forward now, into a kind of consciousness that cost them dearly. Jung himself experienced these losses. As he went deeper into his work with the unconscious, as he developed his understanding of the psyche, he lost things he'd once taken for granted. The ability to believe what everyone else believed. The comfort of fitting in with his professional peers. The ease of living without constant awareness. The innocence of not knowing what he knew. These weren't things he wanted to lose. They were the price of consciousness. And the price was non-refundable. If someone is awakening or has awakened, if they're feeling this sense of loss alongside, or even instead of the gains they expected, they need to understand what's really happening. Because once they see what awakening actually costs, what it takes away forever, they can stop trying to recover what's gone and start learning to live with the losses that consciousness demands. Before we explore exactly what awakened people lose permanently and how to live with these losses, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get True Self-Discovery. Now, let me start with the first and perhaps most profound loss. When someone awakens, they lose the comfort of not knowing. Before awakening, they could move through life without seeing certain things. The unconscious patterns running their behavior. The illusions holding their worldview together. The ways they were deceiving themselves. The reality they were avoiding. Not knowing was comfortable. It was protective. It allowed them to function without the weight of full awareness. But awakening strips this away. Suddenly they see things, their own patterns, their self-deceptions, the reality beneath the stories they've been telling themselves. And once they see these things, they can't unsee them. The ignorance that protected them is gone, and it's never coming back. Jung called this the withdrawal of projections. Before awakening, a person projects meanings and qualities onto the world that aren't actually there. They think their job will give them fulfillment. They think their partner will complete them. They think achievement will prove their worth. These projections are comforting. They give life structure and purpose. They make the world feel manageable. But awakening means seeing through these projections. Realizing that the job is just a job. The partner is just another flawed human. Achievement is just achievement. It doesn't prove anything about one's essential value. The comfort that came from these projections dissolves, and the person is left facing reality without the cushioning illusions that made it bearable. This loss is permanent. Once someone sees that they've been projecting, that they've been living in a story rather than reality, they can't go back to the innocent belief in those projections. They know too much now. The the world becomes harder, colder, more demanding. Not because it changed, but because they're seeing it as it actually is rather than as they needed it to be. Here's another loss that awakening brings: the ability to fit in comfortably with the collective. Before awakening, a person could participate in the shared reality without question. They could believe what their culture believed, value what their society valued, pursue what their community pursued. They were part of the collective trance, and there was comfort in that belonging. But awakening means waking from that trance. And once someone wakes up, they see that most of what the collective believes is unconscious conditioning. Most of what society values is based on unexamined assumptions. Most of what people pursue won't actually bring what they're seeking. This seeing creates immediate distance from the collective. The person can't participate in conversations the way they used to. They can't laugh at the same jokes. They can't get excited about the same pursuits. They can't share the same concerns. Not because they've become superior or judgmental, but because they're operating from a different level of consciousness now. The collective agreements that everyone else accepts without question, they can see through them. Jung talked about this as the separation that individuation requires. To become a conscious individual, a person must separate from the collective unconscious. They must think their own thoughts rather than thinking what they've been conditioned to think. They must feel their own feelings rather than feeling what's socially acceptable. They must choose their own path rather than following the script their culture provided. But this separation comes at a cost. The cost is belonging, the ease of fitting in, the comfort of being one of many who all believe the same things, value the same things, pursue the same things. Once someone awakens, they can pretend to fit in, but they can't actually fit in. They're too different now, too conscious, too aware of what everyone else is unconscious of. And this loss is permanent. Even if the person wanted to return to unconscious belonging, even if they tried to re-embed themselves in the collective, they couldn't. They know too much. They see too clearly. The door to innocent participation in the collective trance has closed forever. Here's another thing: awakened people lose the innocence with which they once experienced relationships. Before awakening, relationships could be simple. Two people coming together, enjoying each other, building a life. There was a kind of unconscious ease to it. They didn't see all the dynamics, all the projections, all the unconscious material being exchanged. But when someone awakens, relationships become visible in a completely different way. They start seeing the shadow projections, how people project their disowned qualities onto their partners. They see the complexes activating, how childhood wounds drive adult behavior. They see the unconscious contracts, how relationships are often built on unspoken agreements to meet each other's needs without having to ask directly. Jung worked extensively with couples, and he observed that as one or both partners individuated, the relationship became more complicated. Not worse necessarily, but more conscious. And consciousness in relationships means seeing all the mechanisms that were operating unconsciously before. Seeing how much of what passes for love is actually need. How much of what feels like connection is actually two people using each other to avoid their own loneliness. How much of what looks like intimacy is actually two personas interacting while the real people remain hidden. This seeing changes everything. An awakened person can't relate unconsciously anymore. They can't just fall into the comfortable patterns. They can't avoid seeing what's really happening beneath the surface. Every relationship becomes more complex because they're aware of the psychological dynamics at play. And they lose something precious in this awareness, the innocence of just being with someone without seeing all the mechanics. The simplicity of enjoying a relationship without analyzing its foundations. The ease of loving without being constantly aware of how much of that love is projection and how much is real. This loss is irreversible. Once someone sees the psychological complexity of relationships, once they understand the unconscious dynamics at work, they can't return to naive relating. They know too much about what's really happening when two people come together. The innocence is gone forever. Here's another permanent loss: the comfort of certainty. Before awakening, a person could be certain about things, certain about their beliefs, their values, their understanding of how the world works. This certainty provided structure. It made decisions easier. It gave them firm ground to stand on. But awakening dissolves certainty. As Jung explored the unconscious, he became increasingly comfortable with paradox, with contradiction, with not knowing. He realized that the psyche operates on a level that transcends logic, that opposites coexist, that what seems true from one perspective is false from another, that certainty itself is often a defense against the anxiety of not knowing. An awakened person starts to see that most of their certainties were just beliefs they had never questioned, comfortable stories they had told themselves about how things are. And as these certainties dissolve, they're left in what Jung called the tension of opposites, able to see multiple truths simultaneously without being able to reduce them to a single, certain answer. This is disorienting. Before awakening, someone could be certain about right and wrong, good and bad, true and false. But afterward, everything becomes more complex. They can see how something can be right from one angle and wrong from another. How a person can be both victim and perpetrator. How an action can be simultaneously generous and selfish. The clear lines that made the world manageable blur into shades of gray. And with this loss of certainty comes a kind of existential anxiety. When someone can't be certain about things, when they're constantly aware of multiple perspectives and contradictory truths, life becomes more difficult to navigate. Decisions become harder. Values become more fluid. The firm ground they used to stand on has turned into shifting sand. This loss, too, is permanent. Once a person has seen the complexity, once they've recognized that their certainties were just comfortable illusions, they can't return to that simple, certain way of seeing the world. They're condemned to live with ambiguity, with paradox, with not knowing. The comfort of certainty is gone forever. Here's another thing awakened people lose: the ability to enjoy things at surface level. Before awakening, someone could watch a movie without analyzing its psychological themes. They could have a conversation without seeing the unconscious dynamics at play. They could observe social situations without perceiving all the shadow projections and power dynamics. They could enjoy the surface of life without being pulled into the depths. But awakening changes this. Jung talked about how consciousness naturally seeks depth. Once someone becomes aware of the symbolic dimension, the psychological undercurrents, the unconscious patterns, they can't turn that awareness off. Everything becomes layered with meaning. Nothing is just what it appears to be on the surface. They're watching a movie and they're seeing the archetypal patterns, the shadow material being explored, the collective unconscious themes being portrayed. They're having a conversation and they're hearing what's being communicated beneath the words, the needs, the fears, the wounds being expressed indirectly. They're at a social gathering and they're perceiving the entire unconscious dance. Who's seeking power? Who's seeking validation? Who's performing? Who's hiding? This depth perception is valuable in many ways. It gives them understanding they didn't have before, but it costs them something too. The lightness of being able to just enjoy the surface without being pulled into analysis, the ability to watch something without deconstructing it, the capacity to be present at a surface level without always diving into what's underneath. Some awakened people try to turn this off, to deliberately stay on the surface, to enjoy things without analyzing them, but they find they can't. The awareness is automatic now. The depth perception is permanent. They've lost the ability to experience life at only a surface level. Everything has layers now, and they see all the layers simultaneously. Here's another permanent loss: the ease of living automatically. Before awakening, a person operated largely on autopilot. They followed habitual patterns without thinking about them. They made decisions based on conditioning without examining that conditioning. They moved through life guided by unconscious programming, and there was an efficiency to that, a simplicity, a lack of constant deliberation about every choice. But awakening brings consciousness to what was automatic. Jung talked about making the unconscious conscious, and that process means becoming aware of all the patterns, all the conditioning, all the automatic responses that used to run without awareness. And once someone sees these patterns, they can't just let them run automatically anymore. They're making a decision and they catch themselves. Is this what I actually want? Or is this just my conditioning? They're reacting emotionally and they pause. Is this about the present situation? Or is this an old pattern being triggered? They're pursuing a goal and they question, is this genuinely my goal? Or did I absorb this from my culture? This constant consciousness is exhausting. Before awakening, most of life just happened. Actions flowed. Decisions made themselves. The unconscious handled most of existence without requiring conscious deliberation. But now, everything requires awareness. Every action must be examined. Every choice must be considered. Every reaction must be understood. An awakened person can't return to automatic living even if they wanted to. They're too conscious now, too aware of the patterns running beneath the surface. The ease of unconscious automatic existence is gone forever. They're condemned to the exhausting work of conscious living, examining, questioning, choosing deliberately rather than moving through life on autopilot. Here's another loss that awakening brings: the protective buffer of denial. Before awakening, a person could deny uncomfortable truths about themselves, about others, about reality. They could avoid looking at their shadow. They could pretend their relationships were healthier than they were. They could ignore the meaninglessness they sometimes felt. Denial was a buffer that made difficult realities bearable. But awakening strips away this buffer. Jung's work was fundamentally about facing what we'd rather not face: the shadow, the uncomfortable truths, the aspects of reality we'd been denying. And once someone does this work, once they stop denying and start seeing clearly, they can't go back to denial, even when reality is painful, even when denial would be more comfortable. They see their own flaws without the softening of self-deception. They see their relationships as they actually are, without the romanticizing that made them tolerable. They see the harsh realities of existence, suffering, mortality, meaninglessness, without the illusions that made these realities bearable. Everything becomes starker, harder, more difficult to avoid. Jung believed this facing of reality was necessary for growth, but he also acknowledged its cost. Living without denial means living with more pain, more awareness of what's wrong, more confrontation with uncomfortable truths. The buffer that protected someone from the full weight of reality is gone, and it's not coming back. Some awakened people, exhausted by this constant confrontation with reality, try to return to denial. They try to stop seeing what they see, to pretend they don't know what they know. But they find they can't. The awareness is permanent. Once denial is stripped away, once someone has learned to see clearly, they can't voluntarily make themselves blind again. They're stuck with clear seeing, even when that clarity is painful. Here's a loss that's particularly painful: the future the person imagined for themselves before awakening. Before consciousness came, they had a vision of how their life would unfold, the career they'd build, the relationship they'd have, the achievements that would bring fulfillment, the life that would finally make them happy. This imagined future gave them direction, motivation, hope. But awakening often reveals that this imagined future was built on illusions. The career they wanted was actually their parents' dream. The relationship they sought was trying to heal a childhood wound. The achievements they pursued were compensating for feeling inadequate. The life they imagined wouldn't actually bring the fulfillment they sought. The entire future they'd been working toward was based on unconscious needs and unexamined assumptions. Jung worked with many people experiencing this loss. They'd spent years or decades pursuing a particular vision of their life, only to wake up and realize the vision itself was false, that they'd been working towards something that wasn't actually theirs, that the future they imagined wouldn't satisfy what they actually needed. And this realization is devastating, because now they have to let go of that imagined future. They have to grieve the life they thought they'd have. They have to release the goals that gave them direction. And they have to do this without knowing what future to put in its place. Awakening destroys the old vision before providing a new one. It leaves someone standing in the ruins of their imagined future, uncertain what to build now. This loss is particularly difficult because the person may have organized their entire life around that imagined future, made career choices based on it, entered relationships because of it, made sacrifices for it, and now they realize those choices were based on illusions. That future isn't coming. It never was. And they can't get back the years they spent pursuing something that was never actually theirs. So, what's left after all these losses? What does an awakened person have after they have lost the comfort of not knowing, the ability to fit in, the innocence of relationships, the comfort of certainty, the ability to enjoy the surface, the ease of automatic living, the buffer of denial, and the future they imagined? Jung would say what remains is reality itself, consciousness, the actual self beneath the persona, the truth beneath the illusions. And these things, while harder to live with than the comfortable falsehoods they replace, are also more real, more solid, more genuinely theirs. An awakened person has lost the comforting illusions, but they've gained the ability to live authentically, lost the ease of unconscious existence, but gained the depth of conscious living, lost the simplicity of surface relating, but gained the possibility of genuine intimacy, lost the certainty that made life easier, but gained the wisdom to hold paradox and complexity. Jung believed these trades were necessary. That consciousness, for all its costs, was worth what it demanded, that living without illusions, however harder, was more genuinely human than living within them, that the losses awakening brings, while real and permanent, make space for something more authentic to emerge. But he was also honest about the cost. Awakening isn't a comfortable process. It doesn't make life easier. It strips away protections and comforts and illusions that made existence more manageable. And those things, once lost, cannot be recovered. The door closes behind you. There's only forward into a kind of consciousness that costs everything. If someone is experiencing these losses, if they're grieving what awakening has taken from them, they need to know this is normal. This is what consciousness costs. And while they can never get back what they've lost, while they can never return to the innocent, comfortable, unconscious way they used to live, they're also more real now, more themselves, more alive in a way that's harder, but also more genuine. The losses are permanent, but so is the consciousness that caused them. And in the end, Jung would say, consciousness is worth its price, even when that price is everything comfortable you once knew.